got a power failure over here where I am, but
Oh, okay.
trying to deal with it.
Oh, okay.
Thanks to technology, we're still connected.
Right. Well, it looks like we're up and going.
All right. So what's our topic for today?
Well, today we're going to be talking about capitalism.
Okay.
I got someone called me a capitalist one time, and I said, "Oh, thanks, man. What a compliment." And then somebody else said, "No, that's not a compliment, man. He was talking smack about you, you know." I said, "Oh,
Right.
man, I'm gonna figure this out, man, you know."
Right.
So, what is capitalism, Verle? You tell me. Well, give me a
Well,
definition.
I think probably a dictionary definition would be an economic and sometimes political system in which, private individuals own capital goods, and the production of these goods and services is based on supply and demand in the general market, known as market economy, rather than through central planning or a planned economy.
Okay. So it's an economic and political system that's controlled by private owners for profit, as
Exactly.
opposed to maybe socialism where there's collective ownership.
Right.
Capitalism is profit driven. Okay, there's
Exactly.
nothing wrong with making a profit as long as you do it with integrity. Nothing wrong with making a profit. But let's talk a little bit about the historical basis of capitalism, sort of how we got here. Uh,
Okay.
you know,
Feudalism and
yeah. Let's start it out probably with feudalism back in the 1300s.
mhm.
And feudalism was sometimes referred to as manorialism, where
Okay.
it's basically an agrarian economic system where you had a lord and you had a serf. Back then, you had lords and serfs. It was
Right.
middle class, or you were either a lord, you were royalty, or you were serf, you were a worker bee. Sort of
Hmm.
like now, you're a billionaire or you work for a paycheck.
Exactly.
It's
Trading
very
hours,
similar. Yeah,
trading hours for dollars. Sure.
yeah. So you the power then was vested in a lord, and there was a legal and economic relationship between what they referred to then as peasants and nobles.
Right.
Uh, and you know,
Kind of similar to what we got now, the
yeah,
owners and the
yeah,
wage earners.
yeah. The nobles basically owned the land. The peasants didn't own the land. They were kind of like sharecroppers, so to speak. And then let's move forward to probably 15, 1600s, 1700s, a system called mercantilism.
Right.
Mercantilism was distinguished by you always wanted to maintain a positive trade balance. So you always
Right.
wanted to sell more than you buy from other countries, maintain large gold reserves, and of course, stealing gold anytime you invaded a new country. With the
Exactly. What's
Portuguese,
interesting,
yeah,
just if I could just jump in for a second, what came to mind, okay, I mean, even going back to, the nobles and the peasants, we're all here on earth, so we're all, I would think, entitled to some small part of God's earth to stand on. So how did it get to the point where some had so much and others had so little?
well, how it started, I think originally, prior to feudalism, you had the concept, and this has happened in China, it happened in parts of Africa, so it wasn't just confined to Europe. And I would imagine if you could study the history of maybe South America and some other areas, it probably happened there too.
Right.
But you, at some point in history, you start to see mass graves, where you would see a grave with 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 people in it. And that was a
Right.
result of war. And you can tell from mass graves that that's when the concept of land ownership came about. Prior to that, there was the land kind of like belonged to everybody. People were nomads. If you needed to farm, you farmed over here, I farmed over there. And then we'd move on and farm somewhere else. We'd hunt over here and you'd hunt over there and we wave going by. But then, with feudalism, that prior to that, there was a concept of land ownership. I'm the lord of this area. This is my land. And that's when you start seeing mass graves. And I think a lot of these systems sort of foster greed and corruption, because
what's interesting, because what's underneath a lot of this is community, and basically a group of people with shared beliefs and attitudes. So I guess if they decide, okay, we're going to kind of organize things a little bit, but then some other group who's disorganized comes in and we're just going to take what you got. Then here comes, we got to get an army to defend not just what's ours physically, but our ideas and our attitudes and things like that, So that could have been, like, I guess, part of the beginnings or the reasons for the beginnings, of the system.
It was the same thing as now, money and power. If you were a lord, you lived pretty good, and people came and brought you money all the time, and you had servants, and you ate good, and you had a big castle.
Right.
If you were a peasant or a serf, you didn't live that good. I mean, life was rough, man. You worked 18-hour shifts from sun up to sundown and 7 days a week, and and just so you could pay the Lord his due.
Exactly. So you can pay to exist on Earth. Pay for the space on Earth.
And it was the same. Some things change and some things stay the same. And I know I had a friend who used to always say, he said, we'd talk about things interesting. He said, the game don't change, it just gets a little cleaner, but it's still the same game as it was 20,000 years ago. The haves and the have-nots, and basically that's what it is. But mercantilism, you wanted to maintain a positive trade balance, always sell more than you buy, maintaining gold reserves. As a matter of fact, there were two Spanish ships that, and one Spanish and one Portuguese, when they invaded South America, they put so much gold on the ships that they sank. Because they were taking the gold back, because that's what mercantilism was about. It's about having a positive trade balance. But the thing about mercantilism, it promoted imperialism. Because you wanted to be a net taker rather than give for what you got back.
Exactly.
You wanted to take in 100 and maybe spend 5, and what happens is, eventually, all the money kind of winds up in one spot, which it did then, that's why I say
it kind of does now,
Yeah, kind of like it does now,
Because like if Bernie Sanders got 95% of the wealth in the hands of 0.1% of the country, which really does sound crazy,
Yeah.
And I guess that gives rise to the kind of, well, I would say, for lack of a better word, Robin Hood mentality, where some are looking like, "Holy, you got too much over there. I got to take some of this," or acquire it some kind of way.
Yeah, it's never usually taken by force. It's usually taken politically.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? You can achieve a lot more politically than you can, sometimes by force. For instance, Nelson Mandela could have never achieved what he achieved by force, but he did it politically, and he eventually got the power to implement what he wanted to implement. But the thing about mercantilism is it promoted imperialism, and that's sort of where imperialism started. Tariffs and subsidies. The policy frequently led to war, and it really motivated colonial expansion. So that's when you started, seeing colonial expansion. It was dominant in Europe from about the 16th and 18th century, and it's still practiced today by the economies of the industrialized nations. It's practiced in the form of economic interventionalism.
Like, would you like sanctions and things like that?
Well, not so much sanctions, but we're going to show you how to get your country, how to come out of dark ages, and how to make your country profitable. we're going to loan you money through the World Bank, you know,
right, that you can't pay back.
yeah, that you'll never be able to pay it back. So we're going to loan you money through the World Bank, and then we're going to have Verle come over there. He has a gold company. He's going to show you how to mine gold. You know, of course, he'll own the company, and we'll give you something. You know, if you're a
For
king,
those
you get a
rights,
lot.
yeah.
You know, and sort of, and that's sort of how it goes.
That's kind of how America operates now, isn't it? You know,
Pardon me?
we come in and the loans. I think I heard a guy on it was a movie I was watching once. We made an analogy. The banks had decided to get into the drug business with some company because he said we had made these huge loans to them, and we knew that people couldn't pay them back selling straw hats and clay pots. So they, you know, I think it was poppy plants and things like that. You know, things related.
Yeah. Well, that's why a lot of countries they've learned that, you know, when you borrow money from the World Bank or you know the IMF kind of overseas. IMF is under the jurisdiction of the United Nations. You typically don't ever pay it all back. You know, so what happens is you start cutting deals, or we'll let you come in and we'll let you mine our gold, we'll let you drill for our oil, and you know, eventually you'll give it back to us, which usually doesn't happen. But you know, economic interventionism, you know, led to things like you know, slavery, dictatorships, and I guess the ideal would be democratic socialism, but we haven't quite gotten there yet. You know,
Right.
we have after mercantilism and the beginning of capitalism. Modern day capitalism really was defined by a gentleman named Adam Smith in the 18th century, mid 1800s, mid 1700s. He developed a principle, what he called absolute advantage. And it was the ability of a party, a firm, or a country to produce a greater quantity of a good or service than its competitors. You know,
Now that's still practiced today, isn't it?
oh yeah,
Some of
yeah.
those ideas.
Certain countries produced steel during the, you know, the industrial revolution. Certain countries didn't. And if you produce more steel, that gave you, you know, that gave you a sort of a leg up in the game. Or if you produced more uranium, that might give you a leg up, you know, and it might not,
Yeah,
you know. So the
absolutely,
whole,
yeah.
yeah. So the whole thing was, you know, Adam Smith said, you know, you have to have an absolute advantage because you have to produce a greater quality and or service than your competitors, and you'll have power over them. Particularly in the context of international trade, you can practice mercantilism without really practicing it. And he used labor productiveness. He based his theory on labor, how productive your labor force was. So obviously,
Okay.
you know, with slavery, um, you know, you know, the monetization of labor was really coming to the fore.
Right.
With slavery, you know, you had that's sort of like the monetization of labor to the nth degree because you didn't have to pay slaves. You just had to make
Right.
sure that they stayed healthy enough to keep working, and you know, so it's a pretty it's this economic system led to
hmm
things like that, you know, like slavery and dictatorships. And you know, today, you know, capitalism today, you know, the monetization of labor is been sort of at the root of capitalism since its inception. You know, and you know, for instance, you know, I think one of the contradictions or one of the inherent contradictions in capitalism is that you're always trying to be more efficient and make more money for the company. And one way you can do that is to make more money, and another way is you can cut your labor costs. Well,
Or
you
both,
know,
yeah.
yeah, you know, you have a minimum wage at 7.50 in some places, and what's happening now is that people that work can't afford to buy the goods that they produce.
Exactly, exactly. So it's kind of a
Mhm.
the program kind of defeats itself.
Well, it
I mean,
defeated
in the
itself, but
long run.
yeah, what they found out was that in order for capitalism to be successful, you need to have somebody at the bottom of the ladder. you know, for everybody else to kind of like step on and make money on.
Right.
You know, every capitalist country has people, you know, in France, it's the North Africans, you know, in the UK, you know, it's people from Africa and people from throughout other countries in Europe that maybe aren't as financially stable and financially fortunate. You know, in
Right.
Germany, it's some of the Turks and some other people from North Africa. You know, so every
Right.
capitalist country, you know, in order for capitalism to really work, you have to have somebody at the bottom. Everybody can't be middle class because that's not the way the system works.
Yeah, that way that's the work. But when you think about it,
Yeah.
everybody could be poor, everybody could be well off, or we could
Yeah.
have how should I put it? I guess a system that benefits everybody.
Yeah, and I think what's happening now is you have basically two types of capitalism. We'll just talk about this real quick.
Okay.
Neoclassical capitalism was capitalism where the government completely stayed out of it. It was the private sector called the shots and made the system go. And it's sometimes referred to as laissez-faire capitalism.
Hands off, yeah.
Yeah, it's sort of was the cause of the French Revolution, maybe.
Yep.
You know,
think?
it was devoid of any government intervention, regulation, or subsidies. And then, you know, you had a gentleman, John Maynard Keynes, who came along with something called Keynesian capitalism. And he held the belief that capitalism needed government intervention to survive. So you got these
Right.
different schools of thought. You know, up until then, everybody pretty much believed that, you know, capitalism was like a totally free market, no government intervention, the strong survive, and that's just how it is. So Keynesian capitalism said that the capitalism needed the government intervention to survive. He held that total spending in the economy, or what's called aggregate demand, determined overall economic activity. And if you had inadequate aggregate demand, then it could lead to high unemployment, prolonged periods of high unemployment. So he advocated the use of fiscal and monetary policies to mitigate the adverse effects of economic recessions and depressions. For instance,
And that made some sense. That made sense too, yeah.
Yeah, it does. It does. For instance, in 1907, and a lot of people don't know this, but in 1907, Cleveland, Ohio was the wealthiest city in the world.
I've heard that before because we were like at one time the eighth largest. And they said at one time we had more millionaires in our suburbs than they had in Hollywood.
Cleveland, Ohio was the wealthiest city in the world. Yeah,
things like that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. John Rockefeller in the early 1900s, he controlled 98% of the oil business, of the drilling, of the production, of the distribution, retail, wholesale. He owned 98% of the oil business in the world.
And this thing, yeah,
and that's what happens with laissez-faire capitalism. It's a total free market, and you know, sometimes it winds up a little skewed. You know, so in 1907, there was a run on the what was it? There was a copper company because they were doing all kind of crooked things. And there was, let me see if I can get the name. There was a copper company that had problems with their stock price. Stock price, the United Copper Company. They had wild fluctuations in the stock price because since there was no government regulations, everybody was kind of doing what they could do. You know, they'd manipulate the price. You know, low, they'd buy, they'd manipulate it high, and they'd sell. And so it caused a lack of confidence in the economic system. So they were led to a run on the banks in New York City. The U.S. government had to ask J.P. Morgan for money to bail the economy out, which he did. So he,
Wow.
he was Wall Street, the financier of financiers. He pretty much controlled Wall Street, and he had pretty much all the money between him and Rockefeller and Mellon and a few other guys. They had about they had all the money pretty much. So
Yeah.
he loaned the government. He didn't loan the government. He bailed the government out, but he said, you know what, I can't do this again. So we're going to have to come up with a system to kind of fix this and regulate this because it's getting out of hand. So this eventually led to the Federal Reserve Act in 1913 to bring some order to the U.S. and world banking system. Because at that time and still today, the world kind of follows the U.S. In terms of the banking system. Russia had pulled out recently, but Russia is really a very small economy, so it didn't really hurt the banking system. The fact that Russia pulled out, but everybody else is pretty much a part of the banking system. And after that, in 1929, you had the crash of '29, and these are inherent problems with capitalism. When you have all the money that goes to one place, and then the people in the other place can't buy anything, you had a crash. I mean, there was enough money for everybody to have a little money, but since there was no government regulation, people did some pretty crazy things. And at the same time, in 1920, you had the rise of unions. You had a strong communist party, and you had a strong socialist party. So basically, they told FDR, they said, look, he said, we'll help you get elected, but this is what we want. We want you to address some of the issues. We want jobs for our people. We want some kind of retirement for our people. We want unemployment insurance when we're out of work, we'll still get money. And so as a result of that, FDR came up with quite a few programs. You okay?
Yeah.
He came up with quite a few programs to sort of address some of these issues. He came up with the CCC, the Civilian Conservation Corps, which helped build national parks, and you had the CWA, the Civil Works Administration, which provided jobs, the Farm Security Administration, which provided subsidies to farmers and low interest loans. He had the National Industrial Recovery Act. He also came up with the Social Security Administration. This is when Social Security started. The Tennessee Valley Authority, which made sure that the Tennessee Valley had cheap electricity by building some dams and sort of regulating what went on there in terms of resources. And also we came up with the SEC, the Security and Exchange Commission. Now, people look at that, but he put 15 million people to work, kind of like where we're in the situation we're in now. But these programs put 15 million people to work.
That was big back then.
Oh, that was like you got about 40 million out of work now. That's probably equivalent to what's out of work now. But see, capitalism, needed the government to get involved to kind of keep this ship straight. And every few years it kind of gets off kilter. Now you had all those programs, and then you had World War II. And World War II, people say that, that's what pulled us out of depression. And that did have a lot to do with it. But, along that time, you have the development of the military industrial complex where, you're making, Ford's making cars one week, the next week they're making tanks, so, you had the military or the government through the military kind of bailing the economy out here again. And that's what happened.
Right.
And,
a lot of people had work,
and as a matter of fact, you had, after World War II, you had the Korean War, you had the Vietnam War. So we were constantly at war because we got on this thing where the war was kind of, helping to keep the economy on track. Well,
what's interesting, Bobby, like you had mentioned how like for capitalism to work, the government had to jump in and play a part. But now we got a situation where the capitalists basically put the people they want in office, super PACs and different things like that, raise money for them to see that their policies are addressed, and maintain that status quo.
Uh-huh. Well, what the strange thing about capitalism is that it's a system that's kind of all these systems, feudalism, manorialism, mercantilism, communism, socialism, they all kind of run their course, and
Right.
one of the big debates now is capitalism kind of run its course, and you say, well, why would you say that? Well, you had the 2000 .com bust,
Mm-hmm.
which took a lot of money, hurt a lot of people, broke a lot of people. I actually knew a guy
Right.
who started a company, a .com company. It went public, and at one time he had almost $100 million, and he ended up, after this bust, he ended up, about 200 grand in a hole, and people were telling him,
Wow, that's crazy.
Cash in, you need to do this and do this. No, I'm going to make more money. So, and that happened to a lot of people, and that was just somebody that I happen to know. It's kind of crazy. Okay, .com bust, 2008, you had the housing credit crisis. Because see what happened in 1970, they realized that it was gotten to a point where people could not afford to buy what they produce. You're producing a lot of cars. Everybody had a Mustang GT or an IROC Z. You remember those days. You had a lot of jobs. You could go anywhere, and you could go to Ford Motor Company or Alcoa or whatever. You can go to work the same day. That's how good the job is.
But what's interesting about that and that time period is like you said, everybody's got a car and what have you. There's a point where once everybody's got their 2 or 3 cars and their refrigerators, and they're like, I can't have my girls to pick those in.
You know what, Verle, you're breaking up real bad.
The production got to stop. Okay.
Okay, yeah, I couldn't hear you. You're breaking up real bad. I don't know.
I see it's kind of pixelated a little bit on the screen. I guess our signal is going out a little bit.
Okay.
Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, a little better now. Yeah.
Okay, but yeah, what I was saying was that after everybody's got all the cars they need and all the refrigerators and big screen TVs, you don't need anything else. There's nowhere to put it. So now, if we're not buying it, then the people who produce it, manufacture it, they don't have a job. We got to lay some people off because we're not. So unless we get some other markets, outside of the country or somewhere, or come up with something new.
Well, see what happened too is that people couldn't afford to pay cash for a lot of things. And if you remember in 70, you had the Arab oil embargo a couple years later, but Nixon had wage and price controls because inflation was getting out of hand, and so things were starting to cost more. People were asking for raises, and it's this vicious cycle. And so we had wage and price controls to try to calm everything down. And they said, well, how are we gonna fix this? Because we need to sell these cars, just like you said, or we need to sell these refrigerators. They said, I tell you what, we'll credit. We'll give everybody credit, because up until that time, there was not. I mean, other than buying a house or maybe a car, a lot of people didn't buy cars on credit then. You would save money, in the 50s, and so you would save money. You would pay cash for the car because they wouldn't give you credit, especially if you were a minority. Usually, wouldn't get credit.
Exactly.
You might get it to buy a house if it was in a certain area. So what they did was they said, well, we can keep the system going, but we got to give everybody credit. And that's the same time that they took us off the gold standard, was when they started really giving everybody credit. So they said, okay, you can buy a car, you can finance this, because I remember prior to 70, I think you had what? You had Diners Club.
That was it. Yeah,
that was only, and it really was. It sort of was a credit card. And it really wasn't.
Then American Express, I think, came after them, didn't it?
Yeah, but that wasn't a credit card. American Express back then, you paid what you charged at the end of the month. So it was
Oh, that's right.
big
We say it
credit.
all up. Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. So what happened was, they extended credit to everyone. And so in the economy, they said, well, if we do that, we're going off the gold standard. And so, we'll give everybody credit. And that's sort of where, the next problem, I guess, arose with capitalism, was that people now people finance cars for 72 and 84 months, which is
That's crazy. You know what's
crazy.
even crazier about it, though, Bob,
Mhm.
is that we're paying interest on money that they printed that there's nothing behind it.
Well, see
It's
the whole,
fiat currency.
and we're getting this from, but the whole concept of money. See, money doesn't exist until somebody pays interest on a line of credit. That's when money gets created.
Right.
When you
It's kind of easy to agree with it.
yeah.
Over years, it's been salt or whatever, piece of metal, whatever the case.
Well, see, when
And I
you
guess
want
screwing,
to
bartering and things.
yeah, when you say the bank says, I'm going to give you say, I need $100,000. They say,
Right.
okay. They don't give you 100,000 in cash. They give you a line of credit. And there's no money that really changes hands. The money that gets created is when you pay interest on that line of credit. And,
Right.
and they take that money that you pay the interest, and they can loan out 90% of that. I think it's called fractional lending, but I think the reserve requirement
like 10 times what they actually have in the bank.
Yeah,
Something like
yeah.
that.
So they can keep 10% and loan out 90%. So that's how money gets created. It was through interest that you pay on a line of credit, which is kind of cool. I think the best situation to be in is to own your own bank. So if you want to buy something, you can
You know what?
issue a line of credit. And there's guys with a lot of car dealerships, and a lot of those guys have their own banks. So when they want to buy a dealership, they don't actually pay money for it. They extend a line of credit.
Bob, I've heard things like this. I heard that what a lot of dealerships do is if you have bad credit, they'll keep you in the finance manager's office or outside his office all day saying, I'm trying to find you a deal. And then when he says, there's one other place I could try, but they're really hard. And then when you're like worn down, said, okay, whatever, there's 4% interest. That's all right, go for it. But that's actually the dealership's bank, So they're making you pay 2 or 3 times what that car is worth.
I mean, if you really want to be a capitalist, get your own bank. because you can't lose, But,
yeah,
but
hey, Bob, let me jump in for a minute. A guy who I used to work for, he was a cinematographer years ago downtown. I think it was Bob Carroll, but he said one of the first things you should try to get is a home and pay it off as soon as you can, because he says at that point that is your bank. And he says what he did, he came to GI Bill, he got a house, he was doing different video jobs, and so. He managed to pay off his house probably faster than most people. But he said in doing that, whenever he needed a new piece of equipment or something, he'd simply take the deed down to the bank. Okay, loan me some money, I'll use this as collateral. He'd get the equipment, do the job, get paid for it, go back, pay the bank back, take his deed back. And it was actually, he actually had it, he owned a piece of the rock, so he was in a good position to negotiate.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it's always better if you're going to borrow from yourself.
Oh, yeah.
I think that's, if you're going to borrow money, if you can borrow from yourself, if you're going to pay interest, pay it to yourself,
Hey, the terms will be better, definitely.
Yeah. So, yeah. So, and after the 70s, credit, they extended credit to anybody and everybody. And this was good. This went on for a while. And,
right.
Eventually, people started defaulting on credit.
Sure.
And which always happens, that's kind of what led to the .com bust. That all these companies were created basically with lines of credit, and they do these initially these IPOs, and they do an IPO at 85, and 6 months later it'd be 25. And
then you get the equity call, and somebody you gotta make up the difference.
And see,
people don't have it,
Yeah. that money would
But you
have to
know,
be paid back. But a lot of times there was no money there to pay back, and it's been, capitalism in the last 20 years has been bailed out 3 times. And this is the third time, and the coronavirus accelerated this, but it didn't really create it. For instance, I'll give you an example.
mhm.
This is a company, United Health.
Okay,
United Health has record profits since March. They've never made as much money in a 4-month period as they made in March, April, May, and June. And,
right,
you say, well, you would think, with all the sickness that they would lose money. See,
right,
what's happening is that people have deferred going to the doctor, but they're still paying the premiums for the health insurance, because people say, well, I don't want to go for the stub toe because I might get COVID. So a lot of people deferred going to the doctor, and they're still getting premiums, but they're not filing claims. So they're loving it. Jeff Bezos, and I'll have to check this out, but someone told me today that his share price of Amazon in March, it was $17.50, and now it's $3,000. Is that true?
I've heard that before. Now, I haven't actually researched
I should have researched
but I
it
have
before
heard
we
that.
got on. Yeah,
But
but
what's interesting is that building he's got out there at Southgate or near there, what used to be Randall Park Mall, it's like Grand Central Station there. I mean, he's got everybody and anybody working there.
can you hear me? Yeah, okay.
Yeah, I hear you now.
The
Yeah.
funny thing about it is that the Amazon fulfillment centers are where malls used to be. I always thought that was so weird, where Randall Park Mall
We used
is.
to spend money.
Yeah, where Euclid Mall was. There's an
Right.
Amazon fulfillment center, and if you go around the country in a lot of other cities, the same thing where the malls used to be, you have Amazon fulfillment centers.
You know what it sounds like, Bobby? It sounds like the pendulum swinging back. 1 minute we're in the spend mode. Okay, now we've got to go back and work and save mode, because you just cannot continually spend and spend. At some point, the person's going to get empty. No more buying. That means people are manufacturing things, and then we're where we are now.
Yeah,
I hadn't thought about that though. Yeah, all the malls are fulfillment centers. Yeah,
yeah.
that's a nice name, isn't it? Rather than plantation.
Yeah. And
Fulfillment
one of
center.
the crazy things about it is that if this is true, I'm gonna check the stock price, because this is true. He made $25 billion from March to July.
Hey, now hold it right there, Bob. I just want to jump in for a second.
Uh-huh.
March is when the coronavirus started, so we should really do a trail. Who's making the money, getting all this money during this crisis? They always say follow the money.
Yeah.
I mean, I hear that they're encouraging doctors to put down COVID, whether you died of something else or not. If they just see certain genes in their blood sample.
Well, what it is, everybody now, with capitalism, the name of the game is making money.
Right.
And everybody's in the frame of mind where, I got to make $1 million, got to make 10 million bucks. And, even with, this crisis that we're in now, this COVID-19 crisis, people are still more worried about making money than keeping people healthy.
Exactly.
I mean,
because you believe that money is the only thing you need.
That's true. Yeah. For instance, let me see. Yeah, that's true. Amazon was at about $17.50 not very long ago, and now it's at $3,000 a share. So
wow, it's doubled. So a lot of people got rich, didn't they? The shareholders.
Yeah, that's right. In March, it was below 2,000, about 17.50, 17.80, and now it's over 3,000. So if you had Amazon stock in March, you probably doubled your money. And you know,
I can only see them getting bigger and bigger because so much shopping is done online now.
Oh yeah, that's the way people shop. Well, it's so easy, man. I mean, it's crazy. My wife ordered something yesterday that she needed, and was here this morning. I mean, that's ridiculous.
That is crazy, isn't it? That's like something out of the Jetsons. We used to
I know.
see,
I'm like, didn't you just order this? I said, what was it, like down the street or something? Maybe it was. Maybe it was sitting down the street. Yeah.
Mall, yeah.
Yep.
By the time you hang up the phone, it's on the way.
Yeah. So,
hey, but Bobby, I got a question for you.
Sure.
With this system that we've been talking about, this capitalism, do you think there's a need for economic reform?
A need for reform?
Yeah.
Well, it has to be reformed.
I mean, you know what? Oh, let me just say this first.
Because it can't last. If it can't last, it can't last. And I'll tell you why. Because if it keeps going like it's going, pretty soon you'll have 10 people with all the money and 350 million with none.
So that means that's time for a revolt, isn't it?
Well, it's not gonna. I think a lot of times when these systems change, they don't change overnight or because of revolt. Because you're talking about the French Revolution, when you could you can get some guys together with rifles and cannons and have a revolution. But now, you can't do that. They could take they could take two Black Hawk helicopters and an F-16 and wipe out the whole bunch of you. Talking about revolt.
Yeah.
But the way you achieve that is politically. You have to you have to protest, you have to get involved, you have to vote, and you have to move it slowly. I mean, people say information, people say Bernie Sanders, oh God, he's a communist. Bernie Sanders will look like a saint in about 10 years because
I think he does now because we're socialism now.
Yeah. I mean, everything he's saying makes so much sense. I mean, you can't.
He was making sense when he was running against Hillary.
Oh
but
yeah,
the Democratic Party wouldn't help him.
A lot of sense, and most people wouldn't take the time to listen to him. But if you listen to what he says, he basically saying like doing some of the same things FDR did. FDR realized that there was a problem, and you can't have 20 or 30 million people out of work, because if you have that many people out of work, there's nobody to buy the goods that you make. That's just like they want everybody to go back to work, and which I'm sure most people would rather go back to work, if they could, but they want to go back to a safe environment, because if they don't go back to work soon and you don't get any unemployment, there's nobody that's going to be able to buy the goods that they would make if they were back to work. And see that's what happened. We need a lot of infrastructure work. That's a place you can get a lot of jobs. We need contract tracers. You could probably employ a couple million people doing that. So there's some opportunities, but I think you have to have the foresight and the planning, I think, to set some of these things in motion, because nobody else is having is having the same problems that we're having here in this country.
Hey Bob, on that note,
nowhere in the world are they experiencing what we're experiencing here.
I agree with you 100%, but I think our African-American communities, are even hit even harder.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Because we're not, I mean, as a group really producing a lot of stuff. We're big consumers, but we're not producing. We Black people make like $1.3 trillion in this country, which makes us like the I think would be the 8th largest economy in the world. More than Spain, with its 46 million people like we do. But we're not producing anything. We don't have, there's a lot of leadership.
Well, you have to. Then what do you have to do? What do you do then?
We've got to, and that's the point. We kind of know what we have to do. We have to we have to come together, I think, first of all.
You have to
But
be,
like when
you
we
have to
had,
be, you have to be owners. You have to, have to be owners.
right,
And
that's what I'm saying. So we have to be the bosses, But
yeah.
like when we had remember J. Edgar Hoover, COINTELPRO,
Mm-hmm.
when that program to come into our communities and destroy all our leadership and what have you.
Mm-hmm.
During, I think that was during, who was president? Eisenhower was president, I think, when he was doing that, though. But just imagine
that was in the
government,
60s. Yeah, that was in the
yeah,
60s. Yeah, in the early
yeah,
70s.
the
Yeah.
government conspiring to keep a particular group down and destroy them every way you can. Everybody, Malcolm X, 24-hour surveillance, Martin Luther King, 24-hour surveillance, and infiltrate, spies in his camp, So,
but you have to, I'll go back to looking at manorialism, mercantilism. You can't be a net spender. You can't spend more than you make. And I think
I
some of
agree.
the lessons there is you have to figure out how to take in more than you spend. And then you have to become an owner. And you're right that the remnants of slavery have, put us behind the 8 ball, so to speak. But, you have to come from behind the 8 ball with a plan. You have to definitely become better educated. You have to think in terms of ownership, and you can't spend all your money on the lottery. I'm not saying people do that, but I'm saying you have to.
But yeah, no, I mean a disproportionate amount.
Yeah.
Probably more on fake hair, nail salons, lottery.
Yeah, I mean
liquor,
that's
liquor
ridiculous,
and cigarettes.
man. Let's call it what it is, man. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Let's call it what it is. And
right.
you have
in the wrong stuff.
I saw a picture the other day. Somebody sent me. It was Mark Zuckerberg and Bill Gates in the picture, and it said $220 billion in one picture, and not one Gucci belt in sight.
Yeah, that's right. Penny loafers and jeans.
So
we see, but that's training from an early age.
Yeah.
I mean, I see a lot of the richest stories, but a lot of these guys were connected from as youth, with people who could kind of guide them along the way.
But you know what? One thing I like about John Lewis, which inspired me about him, even from when he was younger, was his philosophy was you have to be persistent, you have to never give up, and you got to figure it out. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So you have to. You have to. We know certain things that you probably should do or shouldn't do, and you have to. You have to figure it out. I know my brother-in-law is from Nigeria, and he was poor coming up, but he was like a math whiz. And I said, man,
yeah, I remember him. Yeah.
If you didn't, Chadu. I mean, if you didn't have, a nice school and you didn't have books and computers, so how'd you get so good at math? He said he would take the math book. They had to share a book, and when he took it home, he would copy down all the problems. And every day he would do all the problems over and over again.
Yeah.
And then when the next time he got the math book, he might copy down another chapter or two of problems. And he said all day, or when he got home, he said, love math. He just do all the problems. And he said eventually one day he got to have his own book. And he would just go through the book and do all the problems. And pretty soon he knew. And then, so I mean, that's a case where he didn't have a lot. But, he ended up with a master's degree in chemistry here and a good job. He made something out of his life. And he certainly started at the back of the pack, so to speak. You know what I'm saying?
But you know what's interesting? I mean, Judge Muriel Capers passed a while back. Used to tell me, she said there's 2 great equalizers on earth. We all have 24 hours in a day, and we all have a brain. So he said those are great equalizers, and where you end up depends on how you use it.
Yeah.
Now, you made me think of something when you were talking about his childhood right then, and it was that Dick Gregory pointed out one time. He says we are really not as great athletes as people think we are. But when you reduce a person to doing one thing over and over again, you're going to produce some excellent people. I mean, if a child, though, he's doing math problems all day. Other little guy playing a video game or bouncing a basketball and hitting that hoop every day. So guess what? A child who's going to be the chemistry whiz, this guy's going to be my coach. You see what I'm saying? Are you willing to invest the time in the right area and in the right way? I think that's what it comes down to a lot of times.
Yeah, yeah. And I think you have to, like you said, you made a good point. You have 24 hours in a day. And, one of the things about, the capitalism is that, if you come up with a good idea,
right,
you can make a ton of money. There was a black guy invented the super soaker. He just got a check last week for close to $100 million.
That's amazing. I remember that story. Now check this out.
So I'm saying there are opportunities if you want to go after them, and there are excuses too. And I'm not saying, everybody, I know I was working with a guy one time and he was Irish, and I was telling him, says, oh man, they're not going to promote me at this company, blah, blah, blah. He said, yeah. And then he told me his story, his father's story. His father came over from Ireland. I think it was during or after the potato famine. And when he got here, the people that were supposed to pick him up didn't show up.
Wow.
He was like 12 years old and he was pretty much on his own.
So he had to figure out a lot of things quick.
He had to figure out real quick. Now, I certainly didn't have it as rough as him, but I'm saying, it's, there's a lot of racism, and I think we know that, and I think it's racism, but it's more than that. This Black Lives Matter, is in countries that don't really have black people. So you say, well, why are people protesting Black Lives Matter? Because it's more than that. It's black people getting killed, but it's more than that. It's about people in power that are making all the money and they're not sharing it.
Yeah.
That's what's at the root of a lot of it.
Without question. You made me think about something when you were telling me about the guy a moment ago. I used to work for a gentleman. You heard of Winston Willis, right? You're from Cleveland, so you probably heard of him. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So I used to work for Winston. I used to do photography for him, and I used to be a bouncer at one of his clubs. It was after hours when he had it. Mm-hmm. But he was telling me his story. He came from Alabama. He was a teenager when he got up. He went to Detroit first before he came to Cleveland. Mm-hmm. Worked for a lot of people, a lot of Jewish people, business and what have you. He told me he dropped out of school in the 10th grade. And I said, well, why'd you do that? He said, because in the 10th grade, I had more money in my pocket than my teachers in a week. So what could on me? But he had a quality about him. I mean, not just charisma, but figuring things out, which was like second to none. Because he had a lot of people with degrees that worked for him, And he amassed many millions of dollars doing all kinds of things,
Mm-hmm.
And
he was a multi-millionaire. He was a multi-millionaire back in the 60s. I remember him. Yeah.
Yeah, 60s, 70s, and 80s.
Yeah.
But then finally the city kind of broke him because he got into too many legal battles and it just drained him economically. They took property from him. And they showed me a lot of times ways where the courts were really rigged. He could not get it back, broke their own laws,
You remember that old saying, you can't fight City Hall?
That is the absolute truth.
Yeah, you can't fight City Hall,
He found out the hard way.
Yeah, he did. Yeah. But back to capitalism. It's it's a system that I know I had a professor that once explained it to me. He said it's like, if you push a tire, you're running behind a tire, and you push a tire. Mm-hmm. If you slow down, the tire's going to fall. And if you speed up too fast, it'll get away from you. He said, but every once in a while, you have to nudge it one way or another way and just kind of go at a pretty good pace. And he said, that's the same way with capitalism. He said, every now and then it has to be tweaked. It was tweaked back in the 30s with all the New Deal, and he said that, it has to be tweaked and it may have to become more socialist. If everybody at Amazon owned the company and not Jeff Bezos, they'd probably be making 3 times as much money. And I guarantee you their attitude about working would probably be a lot different.
Exactly.
And a lot of things would
Well,
change, you know. Yeah, yeah.
well, that's probably really what's needed, though. A change in attitudes, and also our people need financial literacy.
You need
And if we
financial
kind of
literacy
do those
and
things, you know.
yeah, yeah. And you know, nothing wrong with making a buck, you know. And even
I
if you do
agree.
it, even if you do it collectively, if you say, you know, hey, you know, we live in a city of Verle, you know, we live in the city of Verle, you know, we got this big company and we're all going to pitch in, you know, $1,000 and there's 10,000 of us, you know, and then we'll build this company and we'll all own a piece of it. And you probably would have a
All
different
live well.
attitude, yeah,
Yeah.
about working there. You probably would have a different attitude about working there. So, I mean, I think there's some things and some tweaks that capitalism was probably going to be forced to do because it's having too many crashes. You know, now what's the next crash going to be? You know, in 5 after we get out of this one, there'll be something else. Because what's happening is you got too much money. I think there's 3 people in this country that have as much money as the bottom 50%.
Yeah, that's crazy.
And you can't. It's unsustainable. It's unsustainable because pretty
I mean,
soon.
you know what? I think that's against nature, you know?
Yeah, well, it's just unsustainable because the way the system works is that the people that you're paying $7.50 an hour to, not only can't they buy cars, they probably can't buy the
Rent.
$150 tennis shoes you're selling or the refrigerator for $1,100. They can't afford
Or
that.
Bobby, they can't pay their rent. I remember in
Yeah.
California, there were parking lots where people went and they lived in their cars, but they were wage slaves, and all they could basically do was eat, you know?
The monetization of labor has led to, you know, modern day slaves. I mean, you know, if you
So,
go down,
Bobby, how do we tweak this system, man? How do we tweak
well,
this?
I think you have to tweak it. For one thing, you know, the government has to be involved. They've got to help
Okay.
people out, just like with this unemployment. You just can't stop, you know, letting people eat and pay their rent. You can't do that because
Right.
you'll have a very disorderly society.
Oh, yeah, we have a big homeless group.
Yeah, but you can't blame it on black people because there's not that many black people. Because you're going to have, you know, what happens if you know, if we keep going the way we're going, now you got 80 million people out of work. I mean, what's going to happen then? You know, I think a lot of rich people forget that in countries, you know, and where you have very rich and very poor people, you know, rich people get kidnapped and they have to ride around with bodyguards. They have to live in fortresses, and they can't live normal
Right.
lives. You know what I'm saying? So I think, you know, I think the government is getting involved like they should be, and they have to get more involved. And you know,
But you know what? You know what's crazy? We always hear this thing, you know, well, how are we going to pay for it? And there's not enough money for this, that, and the other. But you know, if there's enough money to build more prisons and hire more guards and put them in uniforms and do all that stuff, it's just a reallocation of these resources, you know.
well, there's plenty of money to pay for it. For instance, you know, they gave big companies this tax break. That was the first thing Trump did.
Yeah.
Was he gave them a tax break.
Corporate
And
welfare.
that was, you know, for instance, you know,
Bobby, that's corporate welfare.
yeah, it is. Amazon didn't pay any tax on, I think, what, 10 or 11 billion dollars in profit. They didn't pay
Now
any.
think about that.
Yeah, and see,
That's insane.
yeah, and when you keep doing that, that's like I'm saying, the money pretty soon gets in the hands of 10 or 15 people, and then, you know, 400 million don't have any, and that's kind of where it goes. So I think
Right.
you have to have government intervention and
Exactly.
to make it work. It's, you know, it's a system that could work, but you know, the reason all these other systems crashed, you know why slavery crashed, because it was just crazy and it wasn't sustainable, and
Right.
it just couldn't last. You know, mercantilism crashed because the same thing. You had a few countries, you know, like Belgium, you know, had half the money in the world. You know,
Yeah.
and the other countries weren't going to stand for that. You know,
You
same.
know, another thing, excuse me, just to jump in, another thing they got to cut is that military budget, you know. Get off these wars and all this stuff. You know, we're paying these defense contractors insane amounts of money. You know,
We've been a free country. Let me see, since let me just figure this out real quick. 10, 20, We've been a free country for 244 years. How many years do you think we've been at war?
Probably 200, if not the whole 244.
221.
I can believe it.
That's a fact.
I mean,
I'm not making this up. You can check the.
I can believe they came over.
Years. We've been at war 221. Yeah.
Bobby, when these folks came over from Europe, you know what they had in their hand? Mm-hmm. The shotgun, the Bible, and a bottle of whiskey. And it's been on since then.
Well, you can't, but you say you can't sustain an economy, with being at war all the time, because that's the money.
Exactly, that's what I'm saying.
That you can't sustain an economy. A wartime economy is sort of kind of played out now. You can't sustain an economy by, we're here, we're there. We wanted more oil, so we hit up, we attacked Iraq. Now we're going after Iran. And every war in the 1900s, since about 1890, every single war has been about oil, man.
It's always about money or wealth or something, one form or another.
Resources, natural resources. Number one natural resource is oil, and that's what every war has been about.
Basically, it's some big guy coming on the plane and saying, "I'm taking your stuff," and there's nothing you can do about it.
Yeah.
Jill Stein. One of the things when she was running for president back when a little while back there, her thing was, let's cut the military budget by 50%. We don't need any more B-1 bombers or F-16s or F-22s or missiles. You remember Russia? Half of their budget used to always be on military weapons. And the thing is, they used to parade the parades through the streets of big missiles and all that stuff. And then here they fell. Wall came down.
The reason we can't. I don't think you can just say, well, let's cut it 50%. You have to look at where you're going to cut it, what are you going to do.
She did the numbers and she said 50%. We'll spend. You know what? I heard that our budget was more than the next 25 industrialized nations combined. We could easily cut 50%. How many times did he kill people?
That's because we're supporting. We're trying to keep peace in the world. And I think.
You know what? I don't know, Bobby. That's one thing I have to disagree with you on. We always go to countries saying we're trying to bring you democracy, but we really want to bring you. We're trying
to keep peace so people can make money. That's basically why we.
Well, I agree with that. Yeah, but you know what? We're trying to bring to the world American managed democracy.
Yeah. But that's not our. I don't see that as our role. I think one time.
I don't either.
Maybe
that's what we're doing.
Maybe the world did need a policeman, but I think now things have changed, and I think this whole capitalism is due for a reset or a change.
Yeah, and I agree.
And I think you just all you have to do is look at what's going on around the world now, and people realize that a lot of the basis of the problem is that people know that they're getting screwed. When they can't pay their rent, you got the government that's going to cut your unemployment back to $200, and Jeff Bezos made $25 billion,
and not paying taxes,
and pay no tax.
But but you know what, Bob? I think it has to happen. We should have it's less competition, more like cooperation, and working together on at least some common thing. People got to have the basics.
Yeah, I agree. But I think it's something that, your government has to be involved in, because it's too big of a problem for a few people to solve, especially if you don't have a lot of money.
I agree with you 1,000%. We do have to have the government involved, and but the government's got to reach out to the community. We got to join hands and deal with this thing.
Yeah. So I think that probably about does it today for capitalism, and we're going to cover another topic at another time called surveillance capitalism, which is sort of another branch of capitalism that's come to the fore. It's called surveillance capitalism. Capitalism,
I've heard of it. Yeah,
is based on monetizing things getting raw materials, creating products, you know, and labor and monetizing it. What surveillance capital does is it monetizes our personal information, and it's sold.
Exactly.
You know, and it's sold to the highest bidder. So
you know, I was just on that note. I was thinking about it the other day, and you know, the way it used to work years ago. You know, you'd see somebody in a mall and just taking a survey. You know, and then they take all the survey takers. You know, they ask you a dozen questions, and they take all this information back, put it in the computer, and then the think tank figure out how they're going to use it to sell more product, whatever. But because of technology now, it changed the game. It's like the whole thing is on steroids now, and we don't need somebody in the mall. You know, your cell phone and your habits on the internet are going to tell us everything we need to know.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So
Big Brother's in our pocket now.
We'll talk about that, but that's sort of another turn that capitalism has taken that nobody could have foreseen 50 years ago. So
I agree.
You know, and what's happening now, you know, we always thought that it would be the government that surveilled us and took away our rights, but it turns out it's private industry that's doing it.
You know, Bob,
and selling information to the government. So, you know,
and they put in the people they want in office. You know.
Yeah, yeah. So it's sort of a vicious circle. But I think I'm encouraged because I think people are really starting to wake up. I think people around the world are really starting to wake up. The capitalism, this capitalism, this system has been around for a long time, and it hasn't worked out very good for most people. So I think eventually, you know, there's gonna have to be a reset. So, yeah. But hey, Verle,
I agree.
As always, man, it's always good chatting with you. And, you know,
you as well. Thank you so much. I learned a lot, and I'm glad to be a part of it.
Yep, I'm sure we'll do it again. And I hope that
whenever, you know. Thank you so much
for having me. You guys out there enjoy what we were talking about. You know, I know capitalism is something that involves everybody. You know, it determines that not only is an economic and political system, but it kind of determines the political system. It's an economic system that determines the political system. You know, because,
exactly.
You know, I've worked on a lot of political campaigns. I had a young lady tell me once, I said, well, how do you get elected? She said, well, you can buy elections, you know. And then Bloomberg spent $1 billion and it didn't work out so good. So I guess people still do have a lot of power, and you can't buy elections.
Exactly.
You know, so yeah.
Right.
Well, until the next time, it's been a pleasure, man. And
you too, Bobby. Thank you for having me again, and look forward to the next one.
We'll talk soon. Okay.
Okay. Take care.
Bye.